and I am a woman. Good morning, everybody. Let me contribute to this series of presentations with some experience we've been trying to develop in Portugal concerning the development of methodology to incorporate environmental services in strategic environmental assessment. This is a presentation by myself, Rita Gomes, who's my PhD student in Portugal, doing her PhD on payment of ecosystem services at the municipal level, and Constanza Belchier, who is now with the European Environmental Agency. Wrong button? Okay. Right, so the purpose is to discuss, in a way, the relevance and possible approaches to ecosystem services, inclusive SCA, where information usually is not as detailed as, for example, we've seen now with Maria Antonieta, who shared the methodology that is being now tested, so we are far from final stages, and to present preliminary results of the application. This is some framework that you all know for sure. I mean, it's only to setting the context for what we're going to be talking about today, and particularly to call attention on the fact that ecosystem services are the benefits to people from ecosystem functions, and also to, in a way, highlight the linkages between, or the importance of direct drivers of change and indirect drivers of change into not only ecosystem services as well as human well-being. And these direct and indirect drivers of change are what becomes the crucial elements in strategic environmental assessment for us to be looking for the influences and the way that ecosystem services might perhaps be incorporated in SCA. This is just a simplified scheme that I tried to draw up so that I could sort of exemplify what we've been looking at. So basically, we have ecosystem services within ecosystems. These obviously have the influence on human well-being. Direct drivers and indirect drivers of change somehow influence directly and indirectly the human well-being through ecosystem services. And very importantly for strategic environmental assessment is exactly the role that governance plays in a way, balancing this flow of influences. We have looked at the existing theory, and Ruel is certainly one of the key authors, and there's been someone I've been working with exactly on ecosystem services. And Ruel has been pushing very much strongly into an integrative approach, which is exactly the kind of approach we are trying to follow. However, there's other experiences which are important in terms of methodologies for strategic environmental assessment, including the World Resources Institute approach as well as the OECD. In Portugal, as part of a review we have done for the Portuguese Environmental Agency, we have tried to look at about 30 different cases of SCA and check to what extent biodiversity and ecosystem services were being considered in these cases. We have verified that 60% of the SCAs do refer to biodiversity, particularly including indicators, both to assess and to monitor biodiversity, but they are still very far from a strategic perspective on biodiversity and even more on ecosystem services. The concern usually that is included in the strategic environmental assessments with respect to biodiversity is very much linked to Natura 2000 sites and particularly to project scales. Regarding the relevance and integration of ecosystem services in SCA, Van Beukering and Rose Ludwig and others have already pointed out the main reasons why it is important for us to start addressing ecosystem services at these levels. Not only to integrate biodiversity in the planning process, to recognize ecosystem services values in the decision agenda, and safeguard provisions for future generations, as well as to provide knowledge related to equity and poverty issues, and also to engage on more socio-ecological approaches and increasing transparency and commitment in decision making. In Sensoed IS team research group I'm leading, we have been trying to incorporate ecosystem services in SEA since 2008. It hasn't been easy, as from the two examples I'll show to you. We're still very far from an ideal situation, particularly as the engagement of stakeholders, as beneficiaries as well as affected communities, is still to be realized, since consultation and engagement in Portugal is, as well as in many other European countries, is, in the context of SEA, is limited by the fact that the European Directive only requires consultations at a more post-final decision stage. And therefore, it's difficult many times to get those promoting and conducting SEA to do it at an earlier stage. However, we've been trying to include, put it on the agenda, relate to the safeguarding evaluation of biodiversity as a critical decision factor, and consider criteria for assessment when we are dealing with strategic options for assessment. And we want to also to try to naturalize somehow the ecosystem services in SEA, even if, exactly following what Caroline was saying or showing before, as a framework, looking more at the qualitative ways of integrating ecosystem services before we actually can get into more monetarization and quantification in economic terms of these services. This is the general methodology we've been trying to develop. Basically, this is the methodology that we follow for SEA in Portugal, which I've been presenting in other occasions, with the identification of critical factors for decision making, which result from the integration and the creation of cluster themes between what are strategic issues for planning and development, what are environmental and sustainability factors, and also what are the key driving policies that we need to consider when doing assessment at strategic level. And despite the fact that many or some people confuse these critical decision factors with environmental factors, which is very far from reality, the fact is that these critical factors are very important when they are identified by the developers of the plan or policy or program, in which they express what are their key concerns and the success factors of their plan. And when we do this, one of the crucial things that we have to do right away is exactly to incorporate the ecosystem services at that point and the value, in a way, of biodiversity. And that can and should be done by incorporating the stakeholders' views and perspectives in what are their interests with respect to ecosystem services. So the identification of ecosystem services not only has a technical element, as we have seen, for example, from the last presentation, but it has also, very importantly, an element of the preference or the interest of the stakeholders, of the beneficiaries, the way they look and see how the ecosystem services is important for them. And then, as we move on with the assessment and analysis of the existing and the trends regarding the development of the area, and as we look for the strategic options and we assess the risks and opportunities of strategic options, it is critical to prioritize the ecosystem services and incorporate these trends with respect to environmental services. And in these trends is exactly where the driving forces play a critical role, both the direct driving forces, but most especially the indirect driving forces. Those have a much special importance at strategic level, and it's the opportunity, in fact, to incorporate them. And it follows on towards assessment, the final assessment, where the evaluation of ecosystem services to the extent possible that we can quantify them with the participation of the stakeholders in assessing opportunities and risks to the possible loss or preferably to the enhancement of these ecosystem services, and that would be integrated into the assessment, used to help with the assessment of options and incorporate in follow-up so that it can follow with the life cycle of the plan.